Hello, today I want to discuss the material from the Nicomachean Ethics Book 5 and how these specific factors can influence the decision between right and wrong, or in this case, just or unjust. For this presentation, I'm going to use a train to track psychological experiment. To give some context behind this, it's basically giving a person with the power to pull a lever to change the direction of the train from hitting something or not hitting it, with giving consequences. On that note, I want to introduce the first example. The first rule I want to discuss comes from the Nicomachean Ethics Book 5, and in the book it's quoted as being a voluntary act. We do some by choice and others not by choice. By choice, those which we do after deliberation; not by choice, those which we do without previous deliberation. So the first example is gonna happen as the person is being killed is going to be a random bystander, and the decision to kill is based on pulling the lever. No consequence if the train continues on its intended path. Of course, this decision would be unjust because of the malicious intent. Because the train was already going to go straight, it had no previous intention of hitting the person on the other track. Pulling the lever would thus be an unjust choice, obviously, correct? So, we're going to categorize the decision to kill just because of the pure desire to be unjust. The next point comes from the Nicomachean Ethics Book 5 again, and this one states that since the lawless man was seen to be unjust and the law-abiding man just, evidently all lawful acts are in a sense just acts, for the acts laid down by the legislator are lawful, and each of these we say is just. So the train in this example, it's going to change. I'm going to discuss a different way this would be morally incorrect. So now we're going to get a random bystander getting hit. The reason is that the lever was pulled in an attempt to silence him for contradicting the law. This would directly be infringing on his rights as a human, thus making it unjust. Which basically refers to the points being made in the Nicomachean Ethics Book 5. The next scenario comes from the quote, again, if one man commits adultery for the sake of gain and makes money by it, while another does it so at the abiding of appetite, though he loses money and is penalized for it, the latter would be held to be self-indulgent rather than grasping, but the former is unjust. End quote. Alright, so something unjust would directly correlate to someone's gain at the cost of somebody's loss. This is the point that we're going to try to make with the next train analogy. So let's say you pull the lever, a person dies, but you gain $1 million. This would be considered unjust. But again, if the money was not a factor and the person still chose to pull the lever, the decision would be unjust but more self-indulgent. He made the morally incorrect choice but gained from it. His intention and gain made his choice unjust. Something unjust is something spread to those close to you. This is the next point I want to discuss. This one is from the same reading and is originally phrased as, quote, now the worst man is he who exercises his wickedness towards himself and towards his friends. So now let's discuss the analogy in this one. The train this time is going to represent a train going towards family members. This option has no gain, but if you pull the lever, your closest friends and family will suffer the consequences of your action. This option here is easy, and no one will decide to pull the lever. The injustice here is a no-brainer. But in the off chance that you do pull the lever, your decision will automatically be unjust because of the fact that you're hurting your family without any reason. You don't have any prior intention. There's no one holding a gun to your head saying you have to kill them. This is your own intentions. It would be something else to say that someone is threatening you to threaten your family. That's their injustice. But in this scenario, it would be you who would be unjust. Let's discuss the next one. The next guideline is, quote, another act that would be considered neither just or unjust is an act with no deliberate intention, such as an accident or something that could not have been predicted. This one stems from the quote, therefore, and that which is done in ignorance, or though not done in ignorance, is not in the agent's power, or is done under compulsion, is involuntary. For many natural processes, even we knowingly both perform and experience, none of which is either voluntary or involuntary. and it shows examples growing old or dying, end quote. So let's discuss this one. This one has more to do with the fact that if no one is at fault for this accident, then no one can be considered unjust. So in this example, we're going to talk about the train going through a forest. The disaster here is that something nobody could have foreseen. A tree fell on the track, derailing the train, but since there was no one at fault except pure natural disaster, it is neutral. There is no one just, and there is no one held accountable or unjust, and there is no one who gains from this. So this is just a pure act of fate. And yes, the train may have crashed and, people may have died. We don't know this. But because of the fact that there was no one purposely pushing the tree off, we can't put blame onto anybody individually or anything individually. So moving on from that one, now let's discuss the opposing side of the spectrum where justice comes from spreading good fortune. This stems from the quote, "He, best man, is not he who exercises his virtue towards himself, but he who exercises it towards others. For this is a difficult task," end quote. So here we see an image of someone bathing in money, and for good reason. Somebody pulled the lever, which granted him $100 cash. But the person giving the money, or the one pulling the lever, only got $10. But he knew how much his other friend liked money, so he gave it to him. He gave him the 100 and settled for less. He made a good choice because he is spreading his fortune to his friends, and he knows that he's not going to get the same amount, but just to see them happy is good enough for him. At this point, he didn't need those extra 100 in his account, so therefore he gave it to them. So let's discuss the aftermath of this transaction. The person pulling the lever is now left in debt. The $10 was not enough for him. He already gave the money to his other friend. Would asking for it back be just? This poses a new question for justice. Why did he give up the money knowing he might need it? Was this poor planning or an act of kindness gone wrong? That's something to think about when discussing the trials of just and unjust, and how it isn't just a black and white line. It's more broad. So now let's circle back to this train. The new dilemma involves two sides of the same story. This dilemma takes the point of view into account, much like the reading describes the differences in value to different parties. The train has 5 men on the track, but the other track only has 2 men. This pulling the lever, killing 2 men justifies saving 5. To an outsider, yes, but to the mother of those 2 men, no, obviously not. To transition the conversation to the relativity of justice. Now we have visualized and can have empathy for the other side. The statement now is addressing the fact that justice may not always mean morally correct. And to elaborate further on that, I want to discuss some more details regarding the train. A child is crying because we are discussing the aftermath of the previous dilemma. Her dad was one of the men hit by the train, and now she and her mom are left to fend alone, making the choice just, yet not morally correct. They have been the real victims of the accident. They have to live with the knowledge that someone deemed their father and husband to have less value than the other 5 men. The next point is jumping off from the last and states that morally correct isn't always just, and vice versa, obviously. Finally, we learn that the lever puller knows that one of the 5 men is a sex offender, but the others are a mystery. The other side still has the father on the track. Now they must decide if the other men's lives should be deemed worthless because one of them is more cruel. The frustration kicks in that regardless, somebody's going to lose, and there's stakeholders on both sides. The difference is that one side just happens to have more stakeholders. He's frustrated because most of them are good people. It's just the number that sets the circumstance in stone. Overall, this analogy provided us with some insight into the question, is it just or unjust? And knowing what we know now using the train analogy, it's easier to comprehend what these different things mean and how they would be applicable to the real world. I just want to open up the discussion of when are these things applicable, and what are the other sides of the situation? I want to give the full 360 view of everything going on when the question is asked, is it just?